Daenerys Targaryen is arguably not just one of the most popular characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, but an iconic part of 2010's pop culture, thanks to the success of Game of Thrones. A lot of George R. R. Martin's world building for the history of Westeros often rhymes, where similar events happen a century ago to events that happen in the main book, albeit with a bit of a twist to it. Some even believe that these events could foreshadow what's to come in the main books. For example, the Dance of the Dragons being a parallel to the conflict that's inevitably brewing between Daenerys and Aegon, whom could also possibly even be a Blackfyre once she does invade Westeros. There are even some simple, fun minor mirrors, such as names. In the dance we have Larys Strong, and in the main books we have Varys, both spy masters and both using their own physical appearance and nature for their advantage. In this video we're going to be looking at the history and lore behind the other Daenerys Targaryens, who they were, their impact in the history of Westeros, and if there's anything from their stories that could be used to mirror our main series Daenerys Targaryen, and what her future might entail. Now, something that's very surprising given how popular Daenerys is as a character is there isn't really that many characters named Daenerys in the history and lore. We could maybe at a push suggest there are some names that could be connected to Daenerys, such as Daenera, Dana, Daenora, Daela, but some of those really are reaching. So what I want to do with this video is stick to the two other Daenerys Targaryens we actually know of. The first Daenerys Targaryen is a sad tale, but one that raises a lot of questions when it comes to the rights of women and the concept of a ruling queen, two issues that will tie in closely to Daenerys' arc in the main book series. If Daenerys does in fact retake the Iron Throne, putting down threats such as Aegon and the Baratheon claims, then she would in fact be the first ruling queen of Westeros in her own right. What about Rhaenyra, I hear you say? Which is fair. It's a tricky subject. Rhaenyra isn't legally considered part of the official monarchs of Westeros, and is seen historically as a claimant or a usurper. Whether this is right or wrong is complex and a subject for a different video, a video I have in fact already made. It's a really difficult subject and really depends on your own point of view and interpretation of the situation and the laws of inheritance, which in itself isn't actually that clear. But technically speaking in lore, Daenerys would in fact be the first true ruling queen of Westeros, which does relate to the issues surrounding the first known Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys is older, she's the first in line, she should be queen, she shall be queen when she and Aemon marry. They will rule together just as we have. Alysanne and Jaehaerys, fire and blood, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, their triumphs and tragedies. The first Princess Daenerys Targaryen was the eldest daughter and second-born child of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen and his wife Queen Alysanne Targaryen, born in the year 53 AC. As an infant, Daenerys was strong and healthy, marked by the silver gold hair and purple eyes typical of House Targaryen. She was a joyful and spirited child, with endless curiosity, utterly without any fear, bringing delight to all that knew her. Lively and quick to laughter, she was often found with mud on her clothes and grass stains from her play in the castle yard. In her early years, she came to be known as the darling of the realm. It is important to note that while she is the second-born child of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, her elder brother Prince Aegon died as a babe a few years prior. So at the time, while she was the second-born, she was functionally the eldest and only child at her birth, which is an important factor politically. The birth of Daenerys brought joy to all of the Seven Kingdoms, with one notable exception, Princess Aeria Targaryen, daughter of the king and queen's sister, Rhaena, and formerly the king's heir. She did not share in the celebrations of Daenerys' birth, as her arrival displaced her in the line of succession. From an early age, Daenerys showed uncommon promise. She began speaking clearly before her first name day, and by a year and a half she was already walking and running, lively and quick beyond her years. In 55 AC, Daenerys was named the Queen of Love and Beauty by Sir Simon Dondarrion of Blackhaven, a mark of the charm and affection she inspired at a young age. That same year, when Queen Alysanne was again with child, Daenerys declared firmly that she wanted a sister. When the babe proved to be a boy, Aemon, she was at first displeased, though she grew fond of him in time. By the age of 4, her imagination was already vivid and untamed. Her favourite plaything, a broomstick, she treated as a dragon, flying it through the halls and yards of the Red Keep, as if she were a true dragon rider. Spirited and willful, she took great delight in ordering her younger brothers, Aemon and later Balon, about, as though she were their queen in truth. And the idea of her being queen is something that troubled her mother, Alysanne. Queen Alysanne is remembered in history for her support of the rights of women, for the outlawing of the right to the First Night, and the creation of the widow's law, to advocating for the rights of women in terms of succession. She famously would support the claim of her granddaughter, Daenerys Targaryen, over that of her own son, Balon, after the death of Prince Aemon in Tarth in 92 AC. But this was not the first time she would support such sentiment. It would start with her own daughter Daenerys in 55 AC. Queen Alysanne held that as the eldest living child, she ought to stand first in the line of succession and be named heir to the Iron Throne. King Jaehaerys, however, took a very different view. For the moment of his birth, he regarded Prince Aemon as his rightful heir. Alysanne did not keep silent on this matter. She reminded the king that Daenerys was older and, by that measure, should inherit. To which Jaehaerys famously answered that their daughter would still be a queen in time once she married Aemon, ruling beside him as a consort rather than in her own right. Grand Maester Bennifer notes that this explanation did little to satisfy Alysanne, who remained uneasy with the arrangement. Princess Daenerys fell victim to the shivers in 60 AC. On the first night of the new year, she woke Alysanne in the dark, complaining of a chill that would not leave her. Every remedy was tried. Hot soups, scalding baths, furs and blankets, heated stones, nettled tea, even mother's milk. Septons and scepters prayed and maesters laboured without rest, yet her trembling only worsened. As dawn approached, King Jaehaerys, seized by desperate hope, declared that his daughter needed a dragon. Ravens were sent at once to Dragonstone, commanding the dragon keepers to bring a hatchling to the Red Keep. The order came too late. Within a day and a half of first falling ill, Princess Daenerys was dead. Her passing broke her mother. Alysanne collapsed into the king's arms, shaking so violently that some feared the sickness had taken her as well. Jaehaerys had her laid to bed and given milk of the poppy, then mounted Vermithor and flew to Dragonstone himself to countermand his order for a dragon. Upon returning, he asked Septon Bath why the gods had taken his child, but even Bath could offer no answer. Though many children perished in that cruel winter, the loss of Daenerys struck deepest of all with the king and queen. It cut at the very heart of the doctrine of exemptionalism, which had held that the blood of the dragon set the Targaryens apart from other men, even protecting them from common illness. Daenerys' death proved otherwise, and no comfort could be found in that harsh truth. The Targaryens were but mortal men. So what can we take away from the tragically short life of Princess Daenerys? Well, much of her legacy is through her mother's views on the succession rights of women, arguing that regardless of gender, being the eldest child, she should have been her father's heir, and thus a ruling queen, rather than a simple consort to Aemon. It's likely that in the scenario Alysanne was suggesting, a marriage between Daenerys and Aemon may still have happened, but Daenerys would have been the ruling party, with Aemon as a prince or king consort. Like we have discussed, all of this is important to the story of our Daenerys Targaryen in the main books. Her ambition is to rule the Seven Kingdoms, not as a consort, but in her own right. Something that was taken from her namesake centuries ago. Certainly, given Alysanne's record with the rights of women, she too would be supportive of the idea of Daenerys being a ruling queen. However, the emergence of the so-called Aegon Targaryen is certainly going to ensure that whatever Daenerys has planned is not going to be straightforward. If he were truly the son of Rhaegar Targaryen, he would by default have the better claim to the throne than that of his aunt Daenerys. But the reality for Daenerys is she doesn't need a legal right to take the throne. She can do it just as Aegon the Conqueror once did, with fire and blood and the right of conquest. In that situation, the legality of it doesn't matter that much. But the lesson we can take away from this first Daenerys is how there have been many Targaryen princesses who could have been ruling queens. Rhaena Targaryen, Daenerys, Rhaenys, the queen who never was, Rhaenyra, Daena the Defiant, and many more, who were all passed over because of their gender. Maybe for the first time in the history of the Iron Throne, that might very well change with Daenerys Targaryen. Whether Daenerys loved Daemon as those who rose for the Black Dragon later claimed, who could say? In the years afterward, Daenerys was naught but a loyal wife to Prince Maron, and if she mourned Daemon Blackfyre, she left no record of it. The writings of Maester Yandel, the world of ice and fire, the Targaryen kings, Daeron II. Sadly, given her young age at her death, the first Daenerys Targaryen's impact on the history of Westeros is very minor. At best we can say she's the first instance of her mother Alysanne pressing for the rights of women to inherit, which of course goes on to play a huge role in terms of Rhaenys being passed over, and later the outcome of the Great Council of 101 AC, a decade after, which in turn was part of the fuel of the Dance of the Dragons. And yes, the concept of this first Daenerys being a ruling queen does arguably thematically tie into the story of the main book Daenerys. But the second Daenerys Targaryen certainly leaves a huge impact in the history of Westeros, for good, and if you believe some sources, for ill. The second Princess Daenerys Targaryen was the daughter of King Aegon IV, better known as King Aegon the Unworthy, and his sister, Daenerys Targaryen. She was the younger sister of King Daeron II. It is strongly believed that the Daenerys of the main book series, the daughter of King Aerys II and Rhaella Targaryen, was named after her specifically. Princess Daenerys was born in 172 AC, nearly 19 years after her brother Prince Daeron, who had come into the world in 153 AC, the year their parents were married. The gap between Daeron and Daenerys was very uncommon, but speaks to the horrific issues Queen Daenerys had, not only conceiving, but carrying to term, with many of her babes being born stillborn, or dying very young. Daenerys sadly had a twin brother, but he too was stillborn. Given all the trauma that Daenerys had suffered, the birth of Daenerys proved perilous, and she lingered close to death in its aftermath, though she ultimately did recover. Now, given how important this second Daenerys is to the wider history of Westeros, we know surprisingly very little about her early life. It was said that Princess Daenerys shared a deep affection with her half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre, a bond said to be so strong that it became the subject of rumour throughout the realm. Yet neither their father, King Aegon IV, nor her brother, King Daeron II, allowed for such feelings to shape the politics of Westeros. Both instead arranged marriages that would strengthen alliances for House Targaryen, binding Daemon and Daenerys to greater designs beyond themselves. Daenerys was promised to Maron Martell, Prince of Dorne, as part of the long negotiations that brought Dorne into the realm under the Iron Throne. After 2 years of diplomacy, the match was sealed, and in 187 AC, once she had come of age, Daenerys was wed in King's Landing. Following the ceremony, Prince Maron and King Daeron paid homage at a statue of King Baelor the Blessed within his sept, honouring the earlier peace he had helped secure between the Crown and Dorne, through Daeron's own marriage to Maron's sister, Maron Martell. The celebrations that followed included a grand tourney where Prince Baelor Targaryen, Daeron's eldest son, earned the name Breakspear after defeating Daemon Blackfyre in the final tilt. Daeron's decision to wed Daenerys to Maron Martell had far-reaching consequences, and many years later was one of the sparks that helped give rise to the first Blackfyre Rebellion, if you believe some tales. King Daeron II had married a Dornish wife. One of his sons had married a Dornish wife. His sister married the Prince of Dorne, and many key positions at court had been filled by Dornish men. Part of Dorne becoming one of the kingdoms of Westeros involved them having a lot more autonomy over taxation and laws than the other kingdoms, which in turn upset many lords across the realm, especially in the Stormlands and parts of the Reach, especially the Marcher lords, who were most unhappy given the millennia of fighting between them and the Dornish to the south, all to protect the borders of the old kingdoms, and later the realm of House Targaryen. All these things did play a factor in lords pushing for Daemon Blackfyre to claim the throne. But apparently, personally for Daemon here, Daenerys was also one of them. The thing is, by the time of the first Blackfyre Rebellion, Daemon had been long wed to Roanne of Tyrosh, and had fathered several children, while Daenerys had borne heirs to Prince Maron in Dorne. Even so, Daemon's supporters insisted that his rebellion stemmed from being denied Daenerys' hand. Some went further, claiming that King Aegon had once promised Daenerys to Daemon as a second wife, following the example of the earlier Targaryen kings, with Daeron II not following through with his father's wishes. Yet, the timeline casts some doubt on such claims. Daemon did not rise in rebellion until 8 years after the marriage of Daenerys to Maron Martell, and there is no record that she mourned him when he fell on the red grass field. More so, Daemon was already married for several years when Daenerys was even betrothed to Maron Martell, so unless the promise of her being taken for a second wife is in fact true, Daemon never had any hope of actually marrying Daenerys in the first place. Realistically as well, you must also consider that being the only sister of the king, Daenerys was an important political tool, and one that he used well to bring the Dornish into the realm. So even though Daemon was a legitimized bastard, there was never any circumstance where Daeron allows Daenerys to marry him. It just makes no political sense to do so. This has led many to believe that the idea of Daemon and Daenerys being lovers may have actually been created in retrospect by supporters of Daemon Blackfyre prior to the rebellion, as a means to further, in their eyes, justify their cause. Given the death of Daemon Blackfyre on the red grass field, it's not surprising that this tale has become one beloved by the singers of Westeros, thus only furthering its legend. But it still may very well have been true. The sources we currently have from this era are very bare bones, more so than even Fire and Blood. There may be more to this story than we currently know. But regardless as to if this relationship was real or not, the legacy of the second Daenerys Targaryen is twofold. She was the method in which King Daeron II finally brought Dorne into the realm of House Targaryen, and finally completed Aegon the Conqueror's dream of a united Westeros. But on the other side of the coin, she could very well have been one of the triggers of the Blackfyre Rebellions that would plague and damage House Targaryen for the better part of a century. Interestingly, the Daenerys Targaryen of the main book series does seem to have a Dornish connection, given Maron Martell's plan to marry his heir Quentyn to her. You also had the emergence of Aegon Targaryen, the thought-dead son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Elia Martell, who many fans believe could actually be a Blackfyre pretender in disguise, all linking back to this second Daenerys and her legacy. George R. R. Martin added the Blackfyre elements into the books quite late, so who knows where he's going to go with it and how he plans to retroactively flesh out the lore more than he already has. Interestingly, Dorne and House Blackfyre is not the only legacy of the second Daenerys Targaryen. Maron Martell built the Water Gardens as a refuge for Daenerys, a place of cool marble, flowing fountains, and a shaded pool to shield her from the harsh heat and dust of Sunspear. There their children played freely among the sons and daughters of Dornish nobles. On one hot day, moved by compassion, Daenerys invited the children of the servants and guards to join them in the water. In that moment, a lasting tradition was born, one that's endured in Dorne to this very day. Watching them together, she saw no difference between the highborn and the low, stripped of rank and raiment. They were simply just children, innocent and deserving of care and protection. She called her eldest son to her side, and urged him to look closely, to see in those children the true heart of Dorne, and to remember them always in his rule. It is said that her words lived on, and passed from Prince and Princess of Dorne to the next, a quiet lesson carried through generations.